My name is Karen Miles, and for the past 9 years, I've been the tech director at a mid-sized AI company based in Austin. I'm 51, a divorced mother of two, and a woman who's been in this industry long enough to know how meetings like this usually go. You keep your head down, stay quiet, and let the suits say what they need to say, even when they butcher your work in the process. That's exactly what Greg Wallace was doing. Greg, our CEO, stood at the front of the sleek glass conference room, smiling widely and flipping through slides that boiled 18 months of engineering into shiny buzzwords. He called our system flawless, groundbreaking, and perfect. I sat 2 seats away, fingers clenched around a pen, feeling my pulse thud behind my eyes. I could see the investors' faces start to shift. 3 of them. 2 men, 1 woman. Ava Reyes, lead partner at Vanguard Circle, leaned forward, slightly frowning. I knew her reputation. She had a PhD in computer science and a reputation for spotting nonsense a mile away. Greg moved to the next slide. The performance numbers flashed on screen, bold and inflated. My stomach twisted. Those figures weren't just exaggerated, they were lies. I looked down at my notepad, trying to keep my breath even. I told myself not to speak. It wasn't my role. Greg had made that clear. But this was my work. I had built that architecture line by line, tested every edge case, and documented every limitation. And he was selling a fantasy. Ava's eyes flicked to me. She noticed something. Maybe the way my body tensed, or how I wouldn't meet her gaze. She raised her hand politely. Could she ask a technical question? Greg smiled that tight smile he uses when he's cornered and motioned toward me like I was a backup singer. Karen can clarify that if needed, he said, already trying to steer the conversation back. But Ava wasn't looking at him. She was looking at me. I hesitated. Every instinct told me to let it go, keep the peace, nod along. But then I heard my own voice before I realized I'd opened my mouth. The system runs at 96 to 98% accuracy on high complexity data, I said, keeping my voice even. Memory usage is 2 gigs per 1,000 inputs. We've optimized for scalability, not perfection. That's where the power is. The room shifted. The second investor, a younger man with finance in his eyes, leaned in. He started writing something down. Greg's expression didn't change, but I saw his hand tighten on the remote. I kept going. I answered 2 more questions carefully and precisely. I didn't contradict Greg directly, but I didn't protect his exaggerations either. Ava nodded slowly after each answer. She didn't say much, but her attention never left me. By the end of the meeting, I felt cold sweat along my back. We shook hands with the investors. Greg did most of the talking, wrapping everything in glossy optimism. I stood beside him, quiet but present. As the door closed behind the investors, the smile dropped from his face like a mask sliding off. He didn't say anything, just looked at me. Not with anger, with calculation. Like I was a loose thread in the fabric he was trying to stitch together, and for the first time I knew exactly what that look meant. I had just made myself a problem. And problems in Greg's world get erased. After my divorce, I needed a reset. I was 42, living in a 2-bedroom apartment with my teenage son, and trying to figure out who I was outside of a marriage that had quietly unraveled over the years. The tech world was where I felt grounded, where logic made more sense than emotions. I joined Helix Systems just months after the split. It was a small AI startup in Austin, still figuring out what it wanted to be. I wasn't looking for a title back then. I just wanted work that mattered and a team that listened. My first role was mid-level engineer, mostly back-end development, but I threw myself into it like it was oxygen. The hours were brutal at times. I remember nights in that cluttered office eating pretzels from the vending machine and staring at graphs until my eyes blurred. I learned the system inside out, and more than that, I started to see where it could go. I wasn't the loudest voice in the room, but I asked the hard questions and offered better answers. Greg was different back then. He was the co-founder with charisma and hustle, and he genuinely seemed to value what I brought to the table. He'd drop by my desk with questions, ask for advice on hiring engineers, even tell the team that my ideas had changed the way they thought about scaling. When the company landed its first big contract, He made sure I was in the meeting. Within 2 years, I was leading the core development team. And 3 years after that, I became director of technology. The promotion didn't change much about how I worked. I still stayed late. I still wrote code. But now I was mentoring new hires, helping shape the culture. I told every junior dev the same thing: we write code like people will read it, not just machines. The machine learning system started as a side project, just a sketch in my notebook about how we could personalize media experiences using behavior-based clustering instead of static rules. Greg gave it the green light and let me build a small team. I wrote the first line of that system in a quiet corner of my kitchen, right after putting the dishes away. It took 18 months to become what it is now, a system that adapts in real time, learns user behavior at scale, and works with a fraction of the resources that competitors require. Every part of it has my fingerprints: the architecture, the tuning, the error handling no one ever sees, but that keeps it from crashing on real data. Greg changed along the way. Success made him louder, quicker to take credit, slower to listen. Somewhere between investor pitches and industry panels, he stopped saying we and started saying I. I noticed it, but I kept working. Because the work still mattered, and because I believed, maybe foolishly, that the truth had a way of surfacing eventually. Greg's assistant called me at 8:15 sharp. He wanted to see me in his office before the team stand-up. I already knew what it was about. My stomach had that familiar weight, like the feeling right before a car crash you can't stop. His office was spotless, always too cold. The kind of room meant to impress people, not invite them. I sat down across from him, keeping my hands folded in my lap. He didn't waste time. He started with corporate language about alignment, chain of command, and protecting the company's image. I listened quietly as he told me I had overstepped. My role was to support leadership, not contradict it in front of investors. Then came the blow. Effective immediately, I'd be reassigned to a senior developer position. No direct reports, no input on strategy, a salary reduction of $15,000. I felt my breath leave my body like a slow leak. Not because of the money, though, that stung. It was the way he said it, like he was stripping me down to size. I nodded once. I didn't trust my voice. He mistook my silence for acceptance and told me he hoped I'd use this chance to refocus on what I did best: writing code, following direction. I stood up, said thank you in the flattest voice I could manage, walked out without looking back. At my desk, I closed the door and sat for a long time. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from restraint. I wanted to scream, but I knew better. Instead, I opened my drawers, pulled out an external hard drive. I started copying files, code bases, design specs, email threads, not to sabotage, just to protect myself. This wasn't just my job. This was my work, my legacy. And now it was under threat by someone who hadn't written a single line of it. I looked around the office I'd spent years in. The sticky notes on the wall. The prototype sketches are still taped near the window. My coffee mug from the first company hackathon. All of it suddenly felt borrowed. I packed in silence. No one came by. The news hadn't spread yet. I kept the drive close and locked my bag before stepping out. As I passed the hallway, I caught a glimpse of Greg in the conference room, smiling on a call. He looked relaxed, confident, like a man who believed the problem was solved. But I wasn't gone. Not yet. And I wasn't done. If he thought this was the end of the story, he didn't know me at all. I was still staring at my half-packed boxes when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Austin area code. I almost didn't pick up. I was tired, raw, and not in the mood for one more thing I couldn't control. But something in me said to answer, so I did. The voice on the other end was clear and direct. "This is Dr. Ava Reyes. We met during the presentation yesterday. I found your contact in the company directory. I hope you don't mind the call." I sat up straighter. No, of course not. I tried to keep my voice calm, but my heart was already pounding. Her tone wasn't casual. She wasn't just being polite. She said she had a few follow-up questions about the system specs I had shared. Her team was conducting additional due diligence, and they needed clarification. I told her I'd be happy to help, though I wasn't sure what role I'd have moving forward. There was a pause. Then she asked a different kind of question, one that shifted everything. Karen, we've reviewed patent filings and research papers tied to your platform. Your name comes up consistently. Greg doesn't. Would you be comfortable confirming who actually developed the system? I didn't answer right away. The air felt heavier, like a door had cracked open, but hadn't fully swung wide yet. Yes, I said it slowly. I built it. I designed the learning architecture, wrote the optimization scripts, oversaw implementation from day one. It's mine. Thank you, she said. That's what we suspected. Then came the second shift. I'd like to meet in person privately if you're open to it. There are options we'd like to discuss that may affect how we proceed with the investment. I didn't speak for a beat. Then I asked the only thing that mattered. Does this have to do with Greg? Another pause, the kind that holds weight. We need to be confident in the technical leadership of any company we invest in, Karen. Right now, we're not. I leaned back in my chair, eyes fixed on the corner of the ceiling. For the first time in days, the fog in my chest started to lift. We agreed to meet the next afternoon at a coffee shop, a few blocks from the office. Neutral ground, no company branding. Just two people talking. When I hung up, I didn't smile. Not yet. But something inside me steadied. This wasn't over, not even close. For the first time since Greg handed me that demotion, I felt something shift back into place. It wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming the truth. And now I had a chance to do just that. The moment I ended the call with Ava, I opened my laptop. No hesitation. I knew exactly what I needed to do and how to do it. I started with the emails. Years of project updates, technical decisions, and late-night problem-solving logged in threads with timestamps and attachments. I pulled the ones that mattered, the ones that proved authorship, and saved them into a new folder I named, quietly, ML Origin. Next came the code. I navigated through the internal repository and exported every commit with my signature. I didn't just write the core functions. I documented every iteration, every test case, and every rollback that led to the final structure. I knew it, like my own handwriting. Then I dug through the design files. Flowcharts, decision trees, technical roadmaps I had sketched out in the early days, when this system was still just a series of whiteboard notes. Most of them still carried file names like Draft V2 Final 3. It made me smile briefly. There were also the patents. I had filed them under my name independently when I realized the system was becoming more than internal tooling, not for ego, but for protection. Those patents weren't aggressive. They were insured. I printed out key documentation, highlighted dates, added annotations where needed. My kitchen table transformed into a timeline of invention, not dramatic, just undeniable. There was power in the process. I didn't feel frantic. I felt steady. This was mine. I didn't need to prove it with speeches or arguments. The proof lived in the files, in the decisions no one else remembered making. As I packed everything into a flash drive and labeled a binder with my notes, I felt the weight of what was coming. Not fear, responsibility. I wasn't planning to fight dirty. I was planning to stand my ground. If Greg wanted to build an empire on top of my work, then he would have to do it with the truth on the table. And the truth was coming with me, every line of it. The coffee shop was quiet, tucked between a bookstore and a yoga studio. Ava was already there, seated at a table by the window, with a black folder in front of her, and a small espresso untouched. She looked up as I walked in, stood to shake my hand, and motioned for me to sit. She didn't waste time. Her voice was low but confident. Vanguard was still interested in the investment, but there were new terms. Leadership needed to reflect technical credibility. That meant separating product development from marketing spin. She opened the folder and slid it toward me. A draft of the deal marked with bullet points that made my pulse slow and steady. The most important line sat halfway down the page. Chief Technology Officer. Reporting directly to the board. Protected tenure. Full authority over all future iterations of the system. I looked up at her and asked the only question that mattered. Why me? Because the technology works, she said, and people like Greg can't fake that for long. We invest in innovation, not illusion, and you built the thing that got us in the room. I leaned back slightly, absorbing it. The offer was clean, fair, and powerful, but I had one condition. My work needs to be acknowledged, not just in private. I want public recognition, not as a PR move, as a fact. Ava nodded. That's already baked into the deal. We'll handle the messaging. You'll have authorship on every press release, your name on the patents, and your role outlined in the executive summary. No more shadows. I didn't smile, but something settled in me. It wasn't ego. It was balanced. For once, the narrative would match the reality. We clinked coffee cups instead of shaking hands. There was still a boardroom ahead, still a reckoning to come. But this was the moment that changed everything. I had walked into that meeting with a folder full of proof. I walked out with something better. Leverage recognition and a promise that my silence would never again be mistaken for consent. The boardroom was full. Greg had called an emergency leadership meeting to discuss the final terms from Vanguard. He stood at the head of the table, one hand gripping the edge, the other holding a printout of the revised agreement. I sat halfway down the table, quiet, listening. He began reading the terms in a clipped voice. The usual funding details came first. Then he paused longer than necessary before continuing. Vanguard required the creation of a new executive position. Chief Technology Officer. The role would hold direct oversight of product development and report to the board, not the CEO. The room stilled. You could feel the silence shift from confusion to recognition. Greg glanced up, his eyes sweeping the room, landing on me for just a second too long. Then he looked back at the page and kept going. The candidate for this position, the investor letter said, must have demonstrated authorship of the core technology and proven ability to lead future innovation. No names were mentioned. They didn't need to be. A junior director across the table looked at me. So did the head of HR. Even the CFO leaned forward like he was seeing me differently. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just let the air settle. Greg cleared his throat. The next line was about equity. Whoever stepped into the CTO role would receive stock options and contractual protections. His voice faltered just slightly. Then he looked at me again, this time fully. He didn't say my name. He didn't have to. I met his eyes without blinking. If he was looking for a fight, he wasn't getting one. Not here. Not now. The VP of Strategy finally broke the silence, asking what the timeline would be for filling the role. Greg answered mechanically. Vanguard expected the position to be filled before closing the first funding tranche. That meant within the week. All heads turned again, some openly now. I gave a small nod. If the board supports it, I said I'd be honored to serve in that capacity. Greg looked like he had been slapped in slow motion. You could see the realization working its way through him. Not just that the role was mine, that he had handed me the leverage himself. He forced a thin smile, said we'd take it under consideration, said we'd talk privately after the meeting. I agreed with a calm voice. But inside, I already knew there was nothing left to talk about. He had tried to erase me. And now, the deal that could save the company depended entirely on putting me in charge. The contract was signed on a Wednesday afternoon in the same boardroom where Greg once demoted me. This time, the seats were full again, but the energy had shifted. I sat at the head of the table not as a guest, not as support, but as the new Chief Technology Officer. Ava joined via video, nodding as the documents were finalized. Her team had reviewed everything I submitted. The code, the patents, the years of archived proof. There were no questions left. Greg stood off to the side, hands in his pockets, silent. He didn't speak during the announcement, just stared at the table while the rest of the room applauded. I didn't look at him directly, but I felt the weight of his presence shrinking. The new title came with a corner office equity and a compensation package I would have never imagined for myself 10 years ago. But more than that, it came with autonomy. No one would ever again revise my work without understanding it. No one would ever sell what they didn't build. In the weeks that followed, Greg's presence began to fade. Fewer emails, fewer calls. The board stopped asking for his input on technical direction. Ava's team worked directly with me. They knew who the architect was now. 3 months later, he quietly stepped down. The memo said strategic restructuring. Everyone else knew the truth. The company needed leadership built on substance, not spin. I stood in my new office the day after his exit. The view was better than my old space, but what struck me most was the silence. Peaceful. Earned. I thought back to those nights alone in front of a glowing screen, building something from scratch, not for credit, but because I believed in the idea. That belief had carried me through every dismissal, every boardroom power play, every time someone thought I'd stay quiet to keep the peace. Now I knew better. Success, I've learned, isn't always loud. Sometimes it comes in quiet contracts, steady nods, and the kind of applause that doesn't need to be requested. It comes when truth holds its ground and lets time do the talking. Greg once told me to know my place. He was right. This is my place. And I built it. Every line, every layer, every step.